situated 22 kilometers from Annecy. Not far from the centre lies Sales Castle, near to which, in a fortified manor house, Francis Lord of Boissy lived with his family. Today, this chapel is all that is left of that ancient building. Francis de Sales was born here on the 21st of August 1567. He was born prematurely at 7 months, the first of 13 children, and baptized on the 28th of August 1567 with the name Francis Bonaventura. Only 8 of the 13 children survived. Francis was the firstborn. His mother, Francesca of Siena, was 15 when she gave birth to Francis. Francis's father was much older. He was 43. He was loyal, honest, but also ambitious, concerned with his family's honour, energetic, with a strong sense of duty. He often said, "We should strive to be honest men." The Baroness de Chantal described Francis's mother as a generous and noble soul, at the same time pure, innocent and simple, a real mother, helper of the poor, modest, humble and polite to everyone. She brought up her children to be God-fearing. This cross, just a few meters from the chapel which is near to Francis's birthplace, marks an important event. The chapel of the Sales family. This chapel was officiated by Canon Deage. Whilst Francis was preparing the Lent sermon of 1604 in this very chapel, he had a vision. The Visitation, announcing the foundation of an order, asking him to be its founder. At the same time, Jane Frances de Chantal also had a vision in which a spiritual leader was presented to her. She recognized him as Francis de Sales during the Lent sermon of 1604. From that moment on, a relationship of spiritual exchange developed between them, which had a deep effect on the saint's spirituality. This building is the parish church of Toronglière, dedicated to Saint Maurice the Martyr. In this church, 2 events happened of fundamental importance in Francis's life. On the 28th of August 1567, Francis was baptized here, and on the 8th of December 1602, he was ordained as bishop. In this presbytery, Francis was to be ordained as Bishop of Geneva at the age of 35. This is how he remembered that very moment. When I was ordained as bishop, God took all of me for himself, then he gave me to the people. He converted me from a person living purely for myself to a person living for others. In order to understand how real and deeply rooted this affirmation was, let's go back to his youth. At the age of 19, while studying in Paris at a Jesuit college, he was tormented by a deep inner crisis. The crisis passed in front of a statue of Mary, and he found the courage to abandon himself completely. Whatever must happen, O Lord, you who hold everything in your hands, whatever you have decided for me, Lord, I will love you, at least in this life, if I cannot love you in eternal life. I will love you here, my Lord, and I live in hope of your mercy. O Lord Jesus, you will always be my hope and salvation. If my behavior means that I will be among the cursed, who will never see your sweet face, at least allow me to never be one of those who curse your holy name. Francis's spiritual ideals are condensed in his book, Philothea, Introduction to a Devout Life. Its theme centers around taking one's baptismal vows seriously. From Thoranglier, we move to Annecy, the regional capital of northern Savoy. Quite rightly called in Francis's times and still today, the Venice of Savoy and the Roman Alps in a far more distant past, for the bastion of Catholicism that it represented during the times of the Catholic Counter-Reformation. In Francis's day, the town had about 2,500 inhabitants. Let's take a look at the streets in the city centre, which still maintain their ancient charm. Beginning with this monument. Behind me, you'll see the Palais de l'Isle.
Le Palais de l'Isle, la costruzione isolotto.
In Francis's day, it was the city prison. When Francis was bishop, he often came here to visit and comfort prisoners.
Confortare ed aiutare I carcerati.
This arch is called the Porte Perrière, the western access to the city. It was here in 1621 that Francis came to welcome his brother, Jean-François, who was to become his assistant and who succeeded him as bishop on his death. Francis's cousin Louise Duchatel, married into the Chamoigny family, lived in this building. The notes of spiritual guidance that Francis sent her now and again served as the base for the composition of his Philothea. Here is the home of Senator Antonio Favre, Francis's friend and confidant. The saint lived here from 1610 until his death. Here, Antonio and Francis de Sales founded the Florimontana Academy, an institution aimed at intercultural and interreligious dialogue. It was here that he wrote the Teotimo, a treatise on the love of God. The city of Annecy lay in the Diocese of Geneva and was also home to its episcopal office. Francis was effectively Bishop of Geneva. With the advent of Calvinism, Catholics were ostracized, monks, nuns, and the bishop had to leave. Annecy was chosen as the episcopal office. Behind me is Annecy Cathedral.
Cattedrale di Annecy.
Francis said of this cathedral, "It is my little shell, but it is dearer to me than all the palaces in the world." It was here that Francis received his minor orders. He was ordained on the 8th of December 1593. He preached and above all confessed. His funeral was held in this very same church on the 24th of January 1623. A particularly significant event happened in this cathedral. A few days before the presbyterial ordination, the Bishop de Granier chose the young Francis as provost, the highest authority of the cathedral chapter. Francis found himself in front of the canons. They were dispirited, unmotivated, and they were looking at him with a certain degree of suspicion. Francis felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. He wanted to encourage them and motivate them in the Catholic recovery of Geneva. This speech encapsulates the real Francis, his passion for God, his pastoral method, and his strong resolve. Let's listen to some extracts. By means of charity, we have to break down Geneva's walls. By means of charity, we have to invade and recover it. There's a pipeline that has always fed and revived all heretics throughout time. It is the example of unworthy priests, their actions and words, basically the wickedness that is in all of us, but in particular within clergymen. It is our fault if the name of God is taken in vain across countries every day, and it is with good reason that the Lord bitterly laments by means of his prophets. In front of the cathedral lies Lambert House, the episcopal residence where Francis lived in his early days as bishop and wrote the Philothea. The Church of Notre-Dame de Liesse, Our Lady of Joy, in neoclassical style. Only the bell tower remains from Francis's time. An important event took place in this church in 1566. The Holy Shroud was displayed for the veneration of the faithful. Francis's mother came to worship it and asked Mary for the gift of a son in its honor. That gift was to be Francis.
Questo figlio sarà Francesco.
Saint Maurice is the oldest church in Nancy. It was founded by the Dominicans in 1442. Francis was confirmed and received his first communion in this church, and it was here, as bishop, that he began teaching catechism to children.
Da vescovo il catechismo ai bambini. Siamo nella cappella.
We are in the chapel of the house known as La Galerie. On the 6th of June 1610, in this very chapel, 3 young women, Jacqueline Favre, Jane Francis de Chantal and Carlotta Brecharad, began their first experience of religious community life in the spirit of Saint Francis de Sales. On the 6th of June 1611, exactly a year later, they took their religious vows.
Promessa e professione religiosa.
In this garden, Francis held his spiritual receptions. They were friendly and informal conversations in which the saint explained the meaning of religious consecration to the first Visitandine sisters, answering any questions they may have had. We are in the heart of the Salesian work of Francis de Sales, the heart of Francis as founder and spiritual guide. This church, restored only a year ago, was called Sainte Source, Holy Spring, for a very good reason. Here, from 1612 onwards, the consecration of the Visitandine fathers began to take shape.
Monache visitandine.
The first monastery of the Congregation of the Visitation, commissioned by Francis, was built on my right adjacent to the church. This church was the monastery church and was dedicated to Saint Joseph by Francis. Built in 1618 and extended in 1645, it was the most beautiful example of Baroque architecture in Savoy. It was destroyed during the French Revolution. Today, very little is left of its ancient splendor. Since 1923, it has been entrusted to a community of Italian immigrants as a religious and cultural reference point. Kilometers from Nancy, and we find ourselves in the heart of the Chablais area that during Francis's days had approximately 25,000 inhabitants. That is 25,000 Protestants and 100 or so Catholics. Thonon is the regional capital of Chablais and lies behind me on the banks of the River Léman. Francis, as a young priest, had launched his challenge. By means of charity, we need to break down Geneva's walls. And for this reason, he came, together with his cousin who was a priest, to this hill, to the Arlange fort. On the 14th of September 1594, Francis de Sales arrived at this fort, remaining here for about 6 to 7 months until Lent 1595.
Nel 1595.
His first missionary contacts were with simple people, farming families, with whom he began to establish a relationship, hoping to widen his contacts with the people of Tonon. His first missionary efforts were very tiring. He was insulted and even lynched. A record has come down to us of these first contacts and Francis's untiring perseverance.
Le testimonianze che ascoltiamo.
Our Blessed Father followed a method which was completely different to those who thought to provoke conversation with insults and condemnation. His behavior and attitude favored agreement. His gestures and actions inspired sweetness. But it does not mean that he was not strong or would not challenge wrongdoing. If others preferred to be feared, he desired to be loved and enter into people's hearts through the door of kindness. Francis passed the night in the fort. At dawn, he celebrated the Eucharist in this chapel and set off to carry out his missionary work. From Allinges, we've come down to Tonon, regional capital of Chablais. At the time, it had about 3,000 inhabitants. To reach out to those who did not dare participate in his preaching, in January 1595, Francis began to print what he called placards. They were a sort of fly sheet in which he laid out in very simple terms the Catholic doctrine, refuting Calvinist theory. Here, in Saint Ippolito, for the first time after 70 years, he celebrated the Christmas Mass of 1596. This event, together with the Quarantore, marked a turning point in his mission and favoured the opening of a dialogue with important figures from the city. In 1595, Francis left the Allinges fort, and until 1598 he lived in the city at the house of Mrs. Dumany, from where he would carry out his mission with greater ease. Now, up we go to the site of the actual monastery of the Visitation, a place which treasures and in which one can live the Salesian spirit. The Basilica of the Visitation and the monastery connected to it constitute a reference point for the entire congregation of the Visitation. They were built on a hill that dominates the entire city of Annecy. Built between 1922 and 1930, the basilica contains the mortal remains of Saint Francis de Sales and Saint Jane Francis de Chantal. Built on rock and constructed on 12 columns, it expresses the concept of Francis's mission, builder of the church in the spirit of the Council of Trent. The large mosaic in the presbytery expresses the motive and driving force of Francis's spirit, a doctor of love. The communion of Trinitarian love and the gift of redemption. Jesus offers himself on the cross with a living and peaceful expression. His blood, collected by the angels, is left to fall on the Eucharistic covenant. The same message of given life is recalled by the tabernacle built and embraced inside the tree of Jesse. To the right of the tabernacle, the grille recalls the presence of the Sisters of the Visitation of Mary in their adjacent monastery. We have come down into the crypt that was used as a chapel by the Visitandines from 1911 to 1930, whilst they were building the upper basilica. All the altars and floors were brought here from the third monastery of the Visitation, which was built in Annecy, and where the railway station now lies. Of these altars, the one behind me was a gift from Don Bosco, endowed in 1879, dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. From this centre, which emanates Salesian spirituality, Francis continues to teach us to live as Christians. Remember that a true and living devotion calls for the love of God. Actually, it is nothing but a true love of God. It is not a generic love, but that which has reached such a level of perfection that it gives us not only the strength to do good deeds, but it guides us to do good with care, readiness, and generosity. A sort of spiritual agility in which we act aided by the force of charity with willingness and affection.